Before we can install our first few rows of flooring, we need to lay down our craft paper. That's a vapor barrier that's 2 layers of asphalt sandwiched in between 3 layers of craft paper. You want to overlap your seams by a good 6 inches or more, just to ensure proper coverage. Remember that low spot in the floor that I showed you earlier and marked with a magic marker? Well, I want to mark that again on top of our paper so that we don't have any flooring seams end up on top of it. All right, I've just put the first row of flooring in place using my baseline here as a guide. I've transferred the baseline from underneath the paper on top of the vapor barrier paper here. You might notice that I haven't laid out more than a couple rows of paper here. I don't like to do that because it usually just gets in the way transferring the tools back and forth. After I finish nailing, I like to double check to make sure that I still have a nice straight line. What I've done is I've positioned each one of these boards equal distance from the baseline. I'm just checking now for the measurement to make sure that my nailing has not knocked any of the boards out of place. It's very important that each board in this first couple of rows be very straight, and that's quite a feat. You might notice I had to go through several bundles of material in order to get those first few boards. It's not so important as you get out in the middle of the floor to have very straight boards. You can have bent and curled boards, and believe me, you'll get them. But these first couple of rows have to be face nailed into place. They're too close to the wall to be blind nailed. One of the methods I use for this is this pneumatic nailer. It has a large rack for nails, and it has a safety point here in the tip that must be depressed before it'll actually operate. It has a number of advantages. One of the advantages is it's lighter, and it's faster, and one of the things I really like about it is the nail heads are smaller. Probably the most common type of face nailer is this manual face nailer. It also has a clip for nails. It's held in by a spring here. And it's activated by driving this plunger into the board with a mallet like this. Now, I didn't sink the nail all the way into the board so I could show you what the nail is like. The nail it drives has an L-shaped head and barbed sides that really make this baby hold well. The only problem with a face nail is that when it's sunk into the board, it leaves a hole that must later be filled. Whenever possible, I like to use a blind nailing method. That is, driving the nail down at an angle just above the tongue. Now, because we're so close to the wall, the only way we can blind nail is by hand nailing or by using the pneumatic finish nailer. I'll use it to nail on the second row. Once our first row is secured, we can begin blind nailing our second row. Notice the color variation between boards here. Expect a lot of color variation in wood flooring, particularly a number 1 comment like what we're using here. The gap between the wall and the first row is intentional. That's our expansion gap. Now, it tapers here from the dining room towards the wall in the living room. This will hopefully make up for a lot of the out-of-parallelness between our 2 facing walls. It will also serve to make our leading edge of our hearth look good, which is our primary focal point in the room. Now that I've got a couple of rows installed, I can begin using the side nailer. The side nailer works in much the same way as the top nailer does, with the plunger driving the nail in and sinking the board in one action. It drives the nails in at a 45-degree angle through the top of the tongue, or blind nails it. But better than that, it has a lip on here that helps to drive the board tight at the same time. As you can tell, once you start blind nailing with one of these power nailers, you can really start to pick up some speed. That is until you reach that right wall, if you're right-handed. Just don't get your fingers between the bricks. We like to rack out a floor, laying out in advance. Helps us speed up the laying process. It gets us down in there close where we can see where the seams are. We don't like seams to be any closer than 6 inches. And we don't like to have any H's develop. H's are when we have two in-butts directly across from each other with only one or two rows separating them. You don't want tight joints like this either. This is far too close. This is not good from a structural stability standpoint or from a look standpoint. You want them at least 4 to 6 inches apart. One final thing you want to avoid is staircasing. That's when you get 5 or 6 rows strung out like this in a tiered fashion, looking something like a staircase. Most rows don't require cutting at more than one end. So when we're racking out a number of rows, we turn the boards around so that we preserve the groove on the ends. Power miter boxes or cutoff saws, like the one you see Dale using here, are used extensively by wood flooring installers. They're especially useful for tight fitting, like what we're doing here around the inlay at the hearth. Once you get the flooring started, you can start racking out and really develop a rhythm and flow to your nailing. When you pick up your wood flooring at your wood flooring dealer, you'll be given short, medium, and long length boards. Be sure as you're racking out the floor that you give equal representation of all of these. Otherwise your floor will look strange. Just a few more nails here now and we'll have this section of the floor complete. Several manufacturers have come out with air assist side nailers in recent years, like this Primatech nailer you see me using here. They certainly don't make the job go any faster, but they do take a lot of the physical labor out of the nailing process. One of the things I like about this particular nailer is it uses regular flooring nails, as opposed to staples as some of the air assist side nailers do. Well, we've got this section of the floor finished. We've gone about as far as we can go now. We'll need to start the next row, then we'll need to scribe around the border of the hearth. And we followed our baseline carefully here, so we should come out equal on both sides. Oh, great, it looks perfect. Oh, you're probably saying, well, another contrived videotape where everything comes out perfect. Well, yours can too, as long as you keep your baseline and your flooring perfectly in line. And once again, we're using the actual board we'll be installing to mark the position of our cuts. This will make for a more precise fit. One of the many uses of a combination square is to mark your depth of cut, as Dale is doing here. Now many pros will actually freehand this as Dale is doing here, but I recommend you use a straight edge for this purpose. One of the tricks used by professional flooring installers when making highly visible cuts like this one is to undercut slightly and on a bit of a bias. This way the board will tuck tight when more flooring is laid against it. A saber saw helps complete our cut. Here, however, Dale needs to cut right on the line. Adjusting the tool to cut on a slight bias is still not a bad idea. When we nail in the second row in front of our border, it will help to snug up our joints, particularly tighten that fit around our miters. Part of the beauty of a wood floor is the color and grain variation like you see here.
As you can see, this is the area we've marked, and I make certain that we don't get any joints in the low spot of the floor.